Well, thank you very much, Hans and Alex, for the invitation. I must say, I was a police officer a very, very, very long time ago, so that doesn't seem relevant to very much in our lives now. But lock the doors now, you can't leave. But, there are those of you we want to speak to later. And actually, that sort of life is not... Oh, sorry, are we... Okay, yeah. That sort of life is not relevant to what we do in running businesses, which obviously we run businesses and we need some aspects of risk management that I think are increasingly complex as our world is globalized in many ways that we didn't expect in the past 2 decades. And the betting business in particular is globalized and in some ways has become far more difficult to control than anyone ever expected. And that means that for those of you who are totalizator operators, there is competition and risk that you never would have expected 2 decades ago. So what I'll talk about today is what we do to combat illegal betting. It's not a very exciting, it's not jumping out of helicopters, I can tell you that. I do spend a lot of time sitting in front of a computer and a Zoom screen, as most of us do. And then also a little bit at the end about variable betting duty and its impact. And betting duty, I think is the English term, but betting tax and why that's important. Obviously, both of these subject areas sort of originate from Hong Kong in how we've studied them and my time in Hong Kong working for the Jockey Club. And the Jockey Club very kindly hosts a secretariat for this council, which is part of the Asian Racing Federation. So what I'll go through are those 2 parts. Firstly, a little bit about illegal betting, because it's a misunderstood subject. In Britain, I think they mostly call it a grey market or black market, and I think that's a misterm. We should really call it illegal, which is what it is in most countries, apart from some countries such as Brazil, where there is an existing law to define it. But it is really illegal betting. What we do to study illegal betting, we studied this for quite some time. From the ARF, it's about, I think 2017 we formed this council, but in the Hong Kong Jockey Club we've been studying it for years because it was our main competitor. And the Jockey Club in Hong Kong is a sole licensed operator. We don't use the word monopoly. Sole licensed operator sounds much better. And the illegal market is a competitor that you have to take seriously, not least because it undermines integrity as well. So there is a way of assessing the illegal market and combating the illegal market, and I'll talk a bit more about that. And then variable betting tax, which is the report we've just published. I say we've published it. Actually, the World Tote Association has kindly published it before the ARF, which I think I'll be in trouble for, but it's on the World Tote Association website, so I do hope you'll have a look. So what is the ARF Council? I won't go through all these names, but it's a council of people. It's a think tank, basically. We're quite diverse. We invite individuals, not organizations, because we want individuals to contribute. And for example, the standard in there is such that we have 2 former police commissioners, Graham Ashton from Victoria Police and Mick Phelan from the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission. And if any of you go to the international races in Hong Kong in December, you'll see Graham and Mick there because they're visiting. They'll be there with their phones taking selfies with horses. They weren't just police commissioners, they're the racing groupies. But sadly, racing groupies are average age about 62, I think, slightly overweight and middle-aged men. But they have great experience, and that's the sort of people we have on the council. It's truly multinational, obviously. The sort of top layer of organizations and people are from racing. Jockey Club, BHA, the Chief Regulatory Officer is a member of our team. Korea, Irish horse racing, etc., etc. So that's very important. We're anchored in racing, although we look at all sports. We look at integrity in sports and how integrity is impacted by betting markets. Academics, we have 6 university professors, mostly Australian. There are so many Australians involved in sports, sports study and governance, obviously. But we're very proud to have those university professors with us because, again, they anchor the work in some credibility and an academic basis. And then very importantly as well, United Lotteries for Integrity in Sport, or World Lottery Association, part of, Interpol and UNODC. So it's a pretty broad representation and a pretty strong group of people. Strong group of people in the sense that we have access to lobbying in government, which is our key priority, obviously. So why is this important for tote operators? Well, I'd suggest illegal betting is the major competitor for tote operators. Probably you look at fixed odds operators as your competitors in the past. But the illegal market salami slices away at the legal market, in many cases without anyone understanding it or knowing it. I think the UK is a very good example of that now. Certainly the regulator doesn't understand the extent to which the legal market is sliced away, and that's not uncommon. Most gambling regulators, I think, only understand what they see in front of them, which is those operators who are licensed and regulated. And the market that they can't see, they fail to understand. So obviously it's huge. We used to do market sizing, but it got a bit silly because if you look at the total global illegal betting industry, it's a trillion US to 2 or 3 trillion US, but it's fair enough to say that it's very large. But there's no point trying to put a quantitative number on it. It does undermine the integrity of horse racing and other sports, and that's the point we've been trying to have more impact with in other sports as well, to help them understand that the problem coming to them with corruption in sport, manipulation of competitions, is largely in these illegal betting markets where there's little visibility of what's going on with betting, whereas obviously there's clear visibility in legal licensed betting operators. Illegal gambling causes far greater gambling harm, and I think this is coming back to this UK example, not picking on Julie, because I know Julie is fighting hard to persuade the gambling regulator there of they should understand better the market. But there's far greater gambling harm coming from those customers who migrate to illegal markets where there's no regulation, there's no prevention of gambling harm, etc. There are some academic studies of that around the world, and we try and use those academic studies to persuade regulators. It's organised and funded by organised crime, and there's some very good examples of that, especially in Asia. And if you look at our last newsletter, we highlight basically a factory in Manila where, like a commercial building raided by the authorities, a series of rooms, which basically represent business lines, a huge facility with hundreds of people working there. The business lines being online fraud, online sexual services, and online betting, online gambling. The biggest revenue part of those illegal businesses is betting and gambling. It's not the sexual services and it's not the fraud. And that's the point of why organised crime does grow from this huge growth of this organised factory-based commercial operation in Asia. Some very visible examples of that if you look online as well. So I think what it means for tote operators is you do need to differentiate yourselves from this market, and that's what we looked at from Hong Kong for many years. Many gambling regulators look at operators and with some suspicion. I think many people who are not part of the racing or betting industry look at gambling operators with some suspicion. There's a need to clearly differentiate legal licensed operators from the illegal market and not be associated with it. And there is a bit of a trick in that. So what does it mean? What's happening with illegal betting now? So our last sort of overview report of the market was in 2022. We don't do this every year because it's quite time-consuming to study a global market. But we wanted to have a snapshot, especially after the pandemic, of what was happening in illegal markets. So we took, a starting point was 20,000 online websites. So it's not Asia, it's 20,000 websites having a reach globally. It's online betting. We filtered that down. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm clicking my laptop, but not clicking the screen, so I apologise. We filtered that down from 20,000 websites, and then looked at which ones had the highest level of traffic through a tool called SimilarWeb. Then we did manual analysis to look at the remaining websites and come up with where they're licensed, how they're licensed, if they're licensed, etc., and then the final report. And these are the findings that we came up with. So we're really looking at the pandemic. I think it was an interesting time to study betting markets and look at what happened during the pandemic. So 36% growth in both those operators that have strict license conditions, that's you basically, tote operators in national jurisdictions, also in those operators that are sort of offshore licensed, and for us that's illegal. We call them something different, but it's illegal. But 64% growth in traffic for those operators that are completely unlicensed, mostly Asian operators. So clearly during the pandemic, which I'm sure you experienced yourself, there was significant growth in traffic to all betting websites, but the growth of the illegal market was much stronger. So what does this mean? So we looked at licensed and regulated, licensed but under-regulated, and unlicensed and unregulated. Don't want to dwell too long on the terms. What we need is to break down the betting markets to sort of give a better understanding of what they are. Obviously, unlicensed and unregulated on the right is a bunch of criminals in parts of Asia, Eastern Europe, other places where they simply operate with no need or desire to have a license. Licensed but under-regulated, free jurisdictions in particular, may have a license somewhere, but that license doesn't give them any legal right to operate around the world, certainly in jurisdictions where there's gambling regulation. And then licensed and regulated, which is you. So what comes out of that is basically over 60% of all online gambling, all online betting is illegal. That would be our proposition. About 39% is licensed and regulated. So really you're in quite a smaller part of the market, and I think that's important to understand because that illegal market is growing and it's a major part of competition to you in the future because it continues to grow. Those under-regulated areas, which we still call illegal, mostly there are free jurisdictions responsible for that. Curacao, Malta, and the Philippines. Obviously, the Philippines we know a lot about, having been in Asia, and there's a huge illegal criminal market there, largely driven by the migration of certain criminal groups from China in the past 15 years. There are some very good examples of that. Malta, driven by the fact that the Maltese government wants to earn money from issuing licenses, and we speak to them in the regulatory authority. They're very nice people, but we have pointed out that their operators don't pay tax. They do point out that their regulatory system is robust, but I don't think it matters. If you don't pay tax in the jurisdiction which is the point of sale of bets, that is the key differentiator. And then Curacao, which is a jurisdiction, again, that I think has no legal basis. So I think those are strong points. They weren't taken very well by everyone when we made them, I must say. But I think that's the main point, that the illegal market grows on the basis of many operators pretending to be legal. And we have to say quite clearly that they're not. So we know what it's like in Asia, China, Malaysia, Thailand. I just give these three examples of huge illegal betting markets, despite the fact there's a very strong legal operator in China, China Sports Lottery, for example. The illegal market still outweighs it and outgrows it by a staggering amount. And that accounts for, just to put some numbers for this, there's not a single number, but put some numbers as indications. Some sources have suggested there's a capital outflow related to gambling, online gambling, of around 145 billion US dollars a year. And that's what the Chinese authorities are worried about, it's capital outflow, which is uncontrollable. And then around 600 billion US dollars a year, which is probably illegal, or more. It's a very vibrant market. And similarly in other parts of Asia for cultural reasons, political reasons, etc. Malaysia obviously is a Muslim country. So why has that happened? I think there are some very interesting graphs if we look at data from going back even further, 2000. This is from 2011. But if we went back to 2000, we'd see this huge growth of internet usage, which you can see there from 2001 onwards, doubled in the past decade. The huge growth in mobile data traffic, which again you know about as operators yourself because you're growing your online market. And what's going to happen is the impact of 5G on mobile data traffic, which is happening now and will continue to happen. And I think there's probably a Moore's law in there, or a similar Moore's law about the extent of data traffic growth through mobile systems and how they expand. If you overlay that in Asia, especially with GDP growth in countries, especially since 2000, and you overlay that with the growth in viewing of sports online and racing online, then you see all these graphs, these lines going up over this period, and often in jurisdictions where there isn't a strong legal market or a strong legal product. So the absence of an effective legal product is the main problem. Obviously, the characteristics of the market, probably similar characteristics to the legal market, based on credit cards especially, but also I'd highlight at the bottom right there PayPal, Skrill, NetTeller, online digital payment systems. Illegal operators for many, many years haven't needed to use the banking system because digital payments have filled that gap. And cryptocurrencies are increasingly filling another gap with anonymity of betting. The use of mirror websites. So for those of you who are not familiar with mirror websites, a mirror website is just the same as your core website. It can be for IT redundancy, for business continuity planning purposes, but usually with operators like this, it's to avoid detection. So operators like Huangguan at the bottom there will have tens and tens and tens or hundreds of mirror websites, which are just servers replicating the main server with different names, but the same content. And that means that they can be based anywhere and evade detection. Actually, several very large legal licensed betting operators operate a very large number of mirror websites as well. I won't say which ones, but for those operators, several in the UK, for example, that's to avoid detection in other markets, such as Asia, which is not good. So it's never been easy to set up a betting website, legal or illegal. I think the cost we looked at a couple of years ago was about $25,000 to set up an online portal. Obviously, then need risk management, data, etc. So there's an awful lot of people involved, but all of that can be outsourced through B2B providers. And criminal groups have realized how easy it is to set up those platforms. I'd also highlight sports data integrity companies, and I won't say which ones. I have been sued before by a very large legal firm in London. Shillings of London are particularly efficient, I can tell you, but they're not very nice people. Police officers are much nicer, I can tell you, far nicer than lawyers like Shillings. So I never mention company names anymore, but sports and integrity data companies are part of the problem. And we have those conversations with them, those larger companies that provide their services, selling betting software, sports and integrity data. I think what we suggest, the problem they drive, is the sale of sports data and racing data to anyone. And the answer from some of these firms when we talk to them about it is, well, we only sell it to licensed operators, such as Curacao, Malta, and the Philippines. And when we point out that that is part of the problem, they know it's part of the problem, but their business model is based on this. And actually, those companies don't make their money from integrity data services, sports integrity data services. They make it from their betting businesses. So that's a problem we'll continue to point out. And we're pointing out to other sports. Other sports haven't realized it. I think Hans mentioned India before, the taxation problem. It's not just a taxation problem, it's the sale of data from racing in India, for example, which is now being sold through a major sports integrity data company to offshore illegal bookmakers. And I don't think the Indian turf authorities understood that. Well, they didn't when they started. Competition manipulation, those of us coming from racing know that it's in those illegal grey black markets that race fixing is largely conducted because anonymity is key. The same in other sports, and this is why we talk to other sports, football and tennis particularly, and point out where the betting markets are, where the manipulation of their competitions are taking place. And that's why not only racing, but other sports need to get better at monitoring betting markets. Most of that is outsourced, going back to those companies. Racing and other sports cannot rely on the outsourcing of sports data integrity monitoring and betting monitoring. Oops. Sorry, there's a lag. Yep. Far higher rates of gambling harm. So I pointed this out earlier, but I'd reiterate it. And I think this is something we need to talk to gambling regulators about in particular. Again, going back to the UK example, the problem of gambling harm is not from those operators that are licensed and regulated. It's largely from online casino gambling, which has a far higher rate than sports betting. Illegal betting, organised crime, I talked a little bit about that obviously. It's a huge revenue stream. And I think if you read our newsletters every 2 weeks, you'll see some very good examples of that. It not only drives revenue for those groups, it funds other areas of organised crime as well. Won't go into details about that, but as I mentioned, the business lines that organised crime groups operate, the startup funding often comes, we see in Asia especially, from betting. But where's the crime? Well, going back to being a former police officer, You do have to have a crime somewhere to arrest someone, preferably. But identifying where the crime took place is rather difficult. In Asia, just take this as an example, or this map could be the whole world. Servers located anywhere, as I said, from mirror websites, server locations changing all the time anyway. Customers from jurisdictions where there are underperforming legal operators or constrained by regulation. And I think a lack of understanding by regulators about the nature of that market. So there is a way forward to that, and this is a slide we've used for many years. It is stakeholder engagement to combat that market. So what we've done from Hong Kong, and we take this model to all jurisdictions, most recently presenting to the gambling regulators in South Africa, who didn't have much of a clue, I must say, about the nature of the problem, but they were receptive to it. Collaboration with the police, with betting and sports regulators, mainly to educate them, because they often don't understand the scale of the problem. Pushing material to the media, opinion shapers, academics, think tanks, websites, etc. The legal betting operators have to be part of the solution, and touch points in financial institutions, ISPs, etc. So that model is replicable, and we do present it around the world, obviously. And it does work. It does have an influence with some regulators. So we've also published a handbook on how sports should go about this, good practices in addressing illegal betting, because obviously you need to protect sports from the integrity problem caused by illegal betting. The Macallan Convention I would highlight as the key to that, and the Macallan Convention is important for gambling operators, betting operators, because it highlights that they must be regulated at the point of sale of the bet. And that is an important point. I highlight number 6 here as well. I won't go through all of them, but where are we? Sorry. Number 6, just to highlight, licensed betting operators should commit to 100% of their revenue to come from regulated markets and exit markets in which there are no viable paths to regulation. That's almost word for word from the Entain strategy statement. And I think it was a powerful statement from Entain, quite a brave one, considering the grey markets they've been in for several decades, but an important one, especially for listed companies. If you're a legal, licensed, responsible betting operator, you cannot be in grey or illegal markets where you don't have a license. So, just go on from that. On the interest of time, I shall press on. Variable betting duty, or betting tax. So, if you have time to read the report, it's not a very long one. It's probably the most boring subject in the world to talk about. And I never thought I'd write a report about betting tax. But it's a series of narratives based on the data showing what's the problem with betting tax around the world. So what we like operators to do, all of the other stakeholders we touch to understand, is that higher betting tax leads to pressure for a higher takeout rate for Tote operators and a higher theoretical margin for fixed odds bookmakers. If you talk to a gambling regulator about that sentence, I don't think most will understand it, which is why I need to keep repeating it. Eventually, those prices have to be passed on to consumers for most operators. Most operators can't keep soaking up higher betting tax. So the consequence is decreased legal betting and increased illegal betting. So the report goes through a whole range of jurisdictions around the world just to identify this huge range of betting tax levels around the world. The highest rate is in Hong Kong, obviously, which is why we wrote it to really highlight this, 75% of GGR. US states, I think, is a problem because of the huge variation in betting levels. And if you look at New Jersey, New York, then you'll see there's clearly competition between the two, and operators will, I think, let me get this right. New Jersey is lower than New York. Is that right?
51%.
Yeah, and New Jersey is a couple of percent lower? I think it's something like that. But I've been told by operators that they take customers from New York and move them across the border, or obviously there's geolocation for online betting, but there will be leakage from jurisdictions. So there's huge variation, 6 to 51% in the US. The median rate is Vive la France, 37.7%. Well done to the French for being in the middle. It's quite not at the back this time. And I'd highlight Australia at the state level, 15%, and I understand Sweden increasing from 18 to 22%. 4% increase is a bit of a hit, obviously, if on your margin. So the lowest betting duty rate we identified is South Africa at 6%. So we tried to map this to illegal betting markets, and we haven't tried to study every illegal market because it's too difficult and too time-consuming, but we have looked at Hong Kong, Singapore, South Africa, Australia, USA, UK, or there are some benchmarks about those markets in the public domain. So the right-hand column shows the illegal market size by head of population, which is obviously more useful than the total market size. And the left column shows the betting tax and the takeout rate. You have to understand the takeout rate, obviously, to show the impact. So it's not the only factor driving people to illegal markets, but it's one of the factors. So we wouldn't say to a regulator, this is the only factor driving people, because, for example, let's take South Africa. South Africa has a problem with its illegal betting market, but it has a very low betting tax for the legal market. But there are a whole range of other factors that are driving customers away from the legal market in South Africa. But I think the mapping is important to help regulators understand this. So I think our conclusions for this, the huge variations lead to distortions in the betting market. Consumers go where the prices are better, and I think you're increasingly going to see that in Europe especially. Government policies are contradictory because usually the gambling regulator imposes restrictions to stop people betting because they want to restrict gambling harm. The Exchequer or the Treasury sets gambling taxes to raise revenue. So there is a bit of an inherent conflict there. And higher betting tax, as I said, repeat the sentence, leads to increased theoretical margin, increased takeout rate, and onto illegal betting markets. So what are the recommendations? As I said, I think clearly differentiate tote operators from the illegal market. And you might have assumed that in the past, but I think you have to do it quite proactively. Support integrity in horse racing and other sports if you're involved in betting on those sports. It's the key driver of success in your business, I think, is integrity in those sports. And lobby government and gambling regulators for stable betting tax in your own jurisdiction, which takes some time. As I said, we've been doing this program from the ARF for the past 6-7 years and from the Jockey Club for a very lot longer than that. So it's not something that's done in a year. It's something you have to do continuously. And we'd very much like to help with that. So my kids would now have their phones out and would be photographing the QR code. Although my kids would have had their phones out during the whole presentation. Not too many of you did, thankfully. So please do visit the website. And our variable betting tax report is available through the World Tote Association. But we have plenty of other publications, and I hope you'll subscribe. And contact us, and we'll help if we can.
Martin, that was great. So much terrific information in there.